Hello, my name is Jeanine and I'm the Data Science and Digital Scholarship Coordinator at the Claremont Colleges Library. I'm here with my colleague Catalina Lopez to reflect on our work with the Bending Water Collections as Data project. In this presentation, we'd like to spend some time talking about our outreach efforts that informed our overall process with this collection. The focus of this project was a portion of the digitized documents from the California Water Documents collection within the Claremont Colleges Digital Library. This full collection is described in the grant proposal as a wide-ranging mixed archival collection of over 46,000 items describing the 19th and 20th century history of water resource development in California and the American West. The bulk of these materials come from government sources, water agencies, and engineering firms. These documents had been digitized recently with a CLIR Hidden Collections grant in 2018 and 2019 with our Special Collections Unit. In the course of the original digitizing of these materials, we noticed that many of these items contained a great deal of observational data related to water resources in California. In an era of water scarcity and global climate change right now, this information about water movement and water use are increasingly of interest to scholars. More broadly, California water history is the story of great quantities of water being moved from one region to the other as white settlers work to supply industry and land development. Water rights will continue to be a topic as Native communities are reestablishing their claims to land and water taken by settlers. Before engaging with these materials under the collections as data model, we wanted to understand how scholars and community members might use them. And as wide-ranging and diverse as this collection was, there was likely no one single approach. So to show some examples of this material, the first example is a hydrograph of the Salton Sea. It's a hand-drawn graph of water levels at the Salton Sea between 1914 and 1935, and this is part of the Imperial Valley Records collection. This is a graph of recorded numeric values over several years, and part of what we wanted to know in engaging with researchers and communities about this item is how valuable it is in its current state and if there are ways to make the data contained in here more findable and more amenable to computational methods. For example, making the visual display of numbers into a machine-readable table. We've got a lot of different answers from that question, and it's still an ongoing conversation. We're working on that one. Example 2 is a document from the Department of Interior Geological Survey Hydrographic branch. This item is part of the Federal Archives materials that we digitized in collaboration with the University of California, Riverside. It's a survey document from the late 19th century from the town of Bishop in Inyo County, California. This is particularly interesting in that this area of California in the Owens Valley is connected to Los Angeles here. It's where water was redirected in the early 20th centuries from the indigenous lands of primarily Paiute peoples to the growing city of Los Angeles. This is an example of the kind of materials we wanted to bring up with our Native community members, particularly our collaborators in the Owens Valley Indian Water Commission, so they can understand some of these materials that are relevant to their continuing interest in water rights. And we can show them how we have them and how we organize them. So in late 2019, after examining some of these materials and having conversations with our in-house colleagues in special collections and cataloging, we proposed a project with 3 main phases. Our first phase would be the assessment and prioritization of materials in consultation with scholars and Native community members. This includes scholars in Indigenous history and water history in California and the West, and tribal leaders and Native organizations. The second and third phases involve the technical processing, OCR, and formatting of the materials and the deposit of data into a discoverable repository. Now, Catalina is going to discuss a little bit further about the assessment of materials and how our outreach efforts were begun.
Hi, my name is Catalina, and I am the project manager for the Collections Data project. Now, before engaging in any outreach efforts, we had to assess what kind of materials were held in the California Water Documents collection. We determined from the collection's metadata records that there are currently 13,746 objects in the collection. We then narrowed down the records that contain the term dataset in its metadata. We found there were over 1,100 objects that had datasets. This next slide contains a sheet with the extracted metadata records, and it is filtered to the objects that contain dataset in the type field. One of our student assistants went through each of these 1,100 objects to assess what kinds of charts, maps, and/or tables were in the collection. Now that we knew which objects contained datasets, it was time to work on the OCR process. OCR stands for Optical Character Recognition, which is the electronic or mechanical conversion of images of typed, handwritten, or printed text into machine-encoded text. The OCR application we used was called AppyFineReader. I'm going to show an example of optical character recognition using this PDF of a table from the Report of Sacramento-San Joaquin Water Supervision for year 1937. In this report is a table called Discharge of Mokelumne River at Woodbridge. I would also like to point out that this river was originally inhabited by the Yokuts, Miwok, and Wintu Native American people. The table contains a row that runs from January to December and a column for each day of the month, showing the daily water discharge in second feet. The table was uploaded into AppyFineReader, and in the next slide is the same table, but is now converted into a CSV file that is currently imported in an Excel sheet. We now have the same table with the same columns and rows, but in a cleaner format that can be imported into other data analysis programs. Another form of computational conversion is by using the images of maps in the collection and inserting them in a geographic software. We chose ArcGIS as the software for this process, which is known as georeferencing. This is a map of California showing agricultural areas and duty of water section in the year 1923. It shows the entire state of California layered over the digital map of the U.S. within ArcGIS. Here is one more example with the map of Water Development Program of Metropolitan Water District in the year 1963. This map shows Southern California with Bakersfield on the left, stretching to San Diego to the right. But in ArcGIS, we can rotate the map sideways so that the map aligns geographically with the two cities. With these new enhancements, we needed to find a way to share the data sets and their records so scholars can access them. We chose Dryad as the online institutional repository to store the tables as CSV files and the maps as GeoTIFF files. The outreach portion of the project extended to meetings with focus groups of researchers, including librarians, archivists, and Indigenous community members and scholars. We relied mostly on Zoom to have engaging conversations since the project took place during the pandemic, and we tracked the names of institutions and individuals we had contacted and those who responded with interest in meeting. Some contacts included the California Institute for Water Resources, Cal State San Bernardino Water Resources Institute, and Humboldt State Department of Native American Studies. We also met with 5 members of UCLA's Water Resources Group, and we learned about different focuses on water research and how our data could assist with their work. This conversation included Anne-Marie Mendoza, who is a member of the Tongva tribe. She introduced us to her video, The Aqueduct Between Us, which highlights work of the Tongva and the Owens Valley Indian Water Commission, an organization dedicated to defending water resources and has indigenous communities at the forefront of these efforts. We had the opportunity to meet with Terry Red Owl from the Bishop Paiute tribe and a member of the Owens Valley Indian Water Commission, and Tongva tribe elder Julia Bogney, who is sadly no longer with us. Both meetings provided important insight into how indigenous history ties with water resources. It was important for our project to include the perspectives of Native Californian peoples who are often rendered invisible after decades of settler water displacement. To spread information on our project, we created a blog website so scholars and researchers can visit and stay up to date on the project, which we decided to rename it the Bending Water Project. We also published blog posts that highlighted some of the tables, maps, and charts in the collection. Feel free to take a look at the site in the link attached. We sent out a survey to university departments, institutions, and individual scholars with a focus on water data and indigenous history. We wanted to gain feedback on how we can improve the accessibility of the California Water Documents collection so that it can benefit their research needs. Some of the questions we asked were, how often do you use digital data in your scholarly pursuits? What other online resources might you use alongside the California Water Documents collection? What are your top 5 areas of interest related to water resources data and the collection? And what are research questions that you might ask with the data from the California Water Documents collection? I'm now going to pass the presentation back to Jeanine, who will share more about our research efforts and challenges we faced with the project.
In March of this year, we presented at the Western Water Symposium via Zoom. This event was hosted by our library along with Pomona College professor Char Miller as a step in democratizing and increasing access to Southern California's water history. Catalina and I presented on behalf of the Bending Water Project. We were joined by Terry Red Owl, our collaborator from the Owens Valley Group, and several other local scholars and historians of Western water history around California and the West. Recordings are available at the link below there. While this was originally intended to be an in-person symposium the previous fall, the pivot to a virtual event actually supported greater attendance and some really dynamic engagement with the scholars and community members, folks who may not have been able to show up in person otherwise. Like many things in this time, it was a challenge that provided some unique benefits. As the presentations were later organized into a Pressbooks volume edited by Dr. Miller, available at the link below. We're hoping that these open access documents will continue to support our outreach efforts going forward, explaining our projects, and provide a framework for future collaborations. To sum up, the challenge that was most obvious were the constraints on outreach from the COVID-19 pandemic. Beyond that, we discovered how incredibly interdisciplinary water history is. This required engagement with different colleges, different departments, different ways of creating research and defining data. Another challenge was our survey. While we spent a lot of time on it, it only received 7 responses. Finally, when you're engaging with community partners from communities that may be marginalized, such as our Native American community partners, they're overloaded with responsibilities and dealing with the needs of their communities. They're consistently under-resourced, particularly during a pandemic. It's challenging to find ways of collaborating that are sustainable, supportive, and actually helpful to those groups. This is an ongoing conversation that we need to have in library and archives about how to sustain collaborations that are meaningful and useful to our partners and not just one more demand on their time. Our next steps over the course of this fall and beyond include finishing up the deposit of data sets into the repository, finalizing a workflow for maps and geospatial data, and working with our in-house partners and campus stakeholders on an ongoing plan for sustainable research for our communities interested in California water documents. Thank you for your time and attention, and we appreciate any feedback, comments, or questions.